Hello, my name is Marcus Krieger. I work at the Historical and Cultural Society of Clay County. We're a museum in Moorhead, Minnesota, but covering Clay County, Minnesota, on the Red River on the border, right across the river from Fargo, North Dakota. And this is a story about Gus Pederson and how he was a World War II POW. So this is Gus and his wife Jean Pederson's wedding photo, and they did a lot in their long lives together. They farmed outside of Barnesville, Minnesota, which is about 30 miles southeast of the Fargo-Moorhead metro area. Um, they raised 5 kids. They were active in their church, and I'm not really going to talk about any of that good stuff. I'm going to talk about the worst 3 years of their lives, the most traumatic, the scariest, the saddest part of their whole lives together. I'm going to tell you about the years when Gus was forced to leave his wife to join the army and fight a war on the other side of the planet, and about how he fought for his life while Jean was a single mother to a baby who had not yet met its father, and how he was captured and taken to a Nazi POW camp, and he fought like hell to survive and come home to his wife and his baby and his home. So, most of this story comes from the Pederson family collection. So that is a file in the Clay County archives that their son Joe Pederson gave us. So Joe has, for I guess his whole life, been collecting the family stories and had the family photographs and writing down the family stories. And God bless him so much for it, he shared it with his local county historical society. So this story is thanks to their son Joe. Um, but we also uh, can hear the story from the horse's mouth. Gus Pederson, in his later years, shortly before he passed away in the late 1990s, sat down for an interview for a series called Kriegieland, Conversations with Ex-POWs, and this is on YouTube. Just search for Gus Pederson, Kriegieland, University of North Dakota, and you'll be able to hear his interview himself in his own words. So, who were the Petersons? Gus grew up in uh, outside of Barnesville, Tansom Township, Clay County, Minnesota. Um, and like I said, it's about 30 or so miles south, 40 miles southeast of Fargo Moorhead metro area. Uh, and this was like a lot of families around here, especially in Tansom Township. This was a Norwegian family. Gus grew up speaking Norwegian. He learned English in school, so English is his second language. Here is his family: his mom Alma, his dad Emil, his older brother Ernie, and Gus. There's a lot of great photos in the Peterson family collection, including these ones. Uh, Incidentally, Ernie, his older brother, who's on the stoop there with him, he's got a World War II story as well, but we don't really know it because the family doesn't really know what his kids don't know what their dad did. They know that he did some top secret stuff in New Mexico, but he never talked about it. So that's an interesting story that maybe we'll get one day. So the Petersons, they were not wealthy farmers. In fact, they were poor farmers. And farming is not always lucrative. And so let's fast forward to 1939. Gus is 20 years old, and he's working on a threshing crew. So what's a threshing crew? Back then, farming was a lot more labor intensive than it is today. You would cut the grain and then you would then need to hire a threshing crew, because most people didn't have a threshing machine themselves, to go from farm to farm to farm, and they would toss what you cut into the machine, and that separates the grain from the straw and the grain that we eat. And so Gus was part of a big group of guys going from farm to farm to farm in 1939, and that's where he met Gene Stanley. Gene was working in the cook car. See, you got a whole bunch of guys working real hard all day. They need 3 meals a day, big meals. So Gene grew up in nearby Pelican Rapids, Minnesota. It's just one county over in Otter Tail County. But she was helping her aunt working this cook car, and Gus saw Jean and thought that she was pretty, and he was right. I bet everybody thought she was pretty, but Gus was the one who asked her out. And she said yes. And long story short, they got married. They were married on Thanksgiving Day, 1941, November 27, 1941, Thanksgiving Day. Isn't that a nice looking couple? I sure hope nothing bad happens to them. Geez, 10 days later, the Japanese Empire launches a sneak attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. December 7th, a day that shall live in infamy, 2,300 Americans were killed. Japan's allies, fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, they thought this was a great idea. This was great news, so they declared war on the USA. And after 2 years of the USA trying to stay out of World War II, we were suddenly in it, and we were in it neck deep. And I'll tell you, we were pissed off. We went all in. After just a few months of being married at home, Gus was drafted into the U.S. Army in March of 1941. That's his photograph over on the right in basic training at Fort Snelling. That is St. Paul, Minnesota. And then he was off to California. And while he was in California, Jean did manage to visit him. She hitchhiked out to Santa Barbara, California, and then she sent him a telegram saying that she's at her cousin's place in Los Angeles. Meet me. Well, Gus did meet her, and that resulted in a baby, Faith Barbara Pederson. I'll tell you how when you're older. So Faith Barbara Pederson, so she was pregnant the whole time she was pregnant. Gus was away in the army, so they're asking each other what should we name this girl, and Gus wrote, if it's a girl, name her Faith, and have faith in God that I will return. And where did the middle name Barbara come from? Well, Jean explained to her kids that's where Faith got her start, in Santa Barbara. Faith would meet her father for the first time when she was 2 years old. So Gus was sent off to New Jersey after that, and he didn't know where he was going, but he knows that since he's on the East Coast and not the West Coast, he's not going to be fighting the Japanese. He's going to be fighting the Nazis somewhere. So let's check in with the wars. How's the war going in Europe? Terrible, absolutely awful. This is the fall of 1943 was the height of the Third Reich, the height of Nazi power. What's going on? Our allies, the USSR, the Soviet Union, is on the ropes in the deadliest battle in human history, the Battle of Stalingrad. It's a 6 or 7 month long battle. Somewhere between 1 and 3 million people died in the Battle of Stalingrad, and the Russians are losing. It doesn't look like they're going to win the Battle of Stalingrad. How are the British doing? Our good friends in the United Kingdom, the British Empire, they're about to get kicked out of Africa. General Erwin Rommel, the famous Desert Fox, and his Africa Corps of German tanks and Italian soldiers, they're about to kick England out of Northern Africa. They're out of Egypt. They're about to take the Suez Canal. So England's got their back against the wall in Egypt. And what about France, the other great power? Well, they've been out of the war for 2 years almost. In the summer of 1940, they were conquered by the Nazis. And I do have to explain a little bit of a complication, because it does show up in Gus's story. So when the Nazis capture France, they didn't want to spend all the guys garrisoning every single town in France. Hitler really wanted to move on and invade the Soviet Union. So what he did is he he garrisoned, he occupied the northern and western parts of France that bordered the Atlantic Ocean, and then he set up a puppet government of Nazi sympathizers, French Nazi sympathizers, to run the rest of France, and that was called Vichy France because Paris was no longer the capital. The capital is Vichy. So what becomes then of France's global empire? You know, France isn't just France at this time. France has got a big chunk of Western Africa and Northern Africa and Vietnam and all that. So who's governing them? Well, if you have seen the movie Casablanca, you might know a little bit about the system of Vichy colonial government. The system goes like this. You might remember our friend Louis here is in charge of Casablanca, and so he worked for the Vichy French government. He's French. And the Vichy French government can do whatever they want to in their lands as long as whatever they want to do is exactly what the Nazis tell them to do. So if you've seen Casablanca, you kind of get what's going on in the French Empire. So on November 1, Gus and the fellas get on a boat, the USS Santa Rosa in New Jersey, and they go across the Atlantic Ocean the whole time. All these there's Nazi submarines trying to sink them, trying to drown them in the water before they get there. And 16 days later, so they're part of Operation Torch. What's Operation Torch? It is in November of 1942, the American invasion of North Africa. And 16 days later, after he gets on the boat, he lands in Casablanca. So, how did the Vichy French soldiers? Well, and most of them they don't like the Nazis anyway, so most of these guys kind of join our side and fight against the Nazis in a Free French Army. So he lands in Casablanca, part of Operation Torch, and he's landing in one of these machines. So he's not part of the invasion where people are shooting at him. He comes about a week later. This thing that he's in is an M7 that's being unloaded in Algeria, November 9, 1942, as part of Operation Torch in this photograph. Gus is part of the 58th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, and he is part of a 8-man crew that is operating an M7 Priest. So what is it? It is well, to people who aren't in the Army in World War II, this looks like a tank, but it's actually not a tank. This is an artillery gun. It's just got wheels. It's just got tracks, like a tank has tracks. So it's a self-propelled gun. Its reason for being is the big gun in front. It's a 105 millimeter howitzer, and that is a gun that I guess it's an artillery gun, blows things up. But it also has a 50 caliber machine gun on it. The machine gun, that is just kind of protecting the crew if there were to be some bad guys close to them. But it is this secondary gun that gave the M7 its nickname, because it's on a turret that people thought it kind of looks like a preacher preaching from a pulpit. So they called the M7 the Priest. There's 8 guys who are shooting the gun, reloading the gun, and protecting them with the machine gun. And I should say that World War II was an artillery war. So when we think about World War II, we think about bombers and fighter airplanes and battleships and tanks. But the biggest producer of casualties, of deaths and wounds in World War II was artillery. And America was really good at artillery. That's one of the reasons why we won the war, and they lost the wars. America's really good at artillery. Let's see, it's other countries, if they see an entrenched, strong enemy position, if you're Russian, if you're Japanese, if you're Chinese, you got to take that enemy position. You get a whole bunch of guys and say, well, they don't have enough bullets to shoot all of us, and then you run right at it, and a whole lot of you die. That's not America's style. America's style is you see that entrenched enemy position. It's a strong enemy position. And those infantry grunts, they radio back to Gus and the fellas with the artillery guns, and they say, "Hey, how?" And it's over here. It's exactly here. Shoot here. And the artillery blows that enemy position to smithereens. So hopefully, our guys can just walk through without dying. It's a much better way to fight a war, which is why we won and they lost. So I said a little bit ago that when Gus gets on the boat in New Jersey, this was the height of Nazi power, the height of the Third Reich, the low point of World War II. Well, the flip side of that, if you want to be an optimist, that means that it's only up from here. And actually, by the time that he's kind of getting off the boat, um, the tide had turned. The Nazi Empire, the Third Reich, is shrinking, and it doesn't grow anymore. So that in that great Battle of Stalingrad, where it looks like the Russians were losing, well, you know what? They sneakily surrounded the Nazis in Stalingrad and around Stalingrad, and suddenly they are winning the battle. They win the Battle of Stalingrad. It's going to take them many months and a whole lot of more people dying, but they win the Battle of Stalingrad. And with the Brits had their back to the wall, about to be kicked out of Egypt, well, you know what? They make a stand at the Battle of El Alamein, and the Brits under General Montgomery, they defeat the Desert Fox. They defeat the Africa Corps, and the Nazis are running west across northern Africa as fast as they can. And at that same time that they're running west, well, they can't run too far west because from coming at them from the other direction, from Morocco and Algeria, Gus and the American army at Operation Torch, they're running towards Rommel from the west. They're running east. And somewhere in there, Gus and Gene Peterson have their first anniversary. And Gus is not in Minnesota. Gus is in Africa. That's a busy year for Gus Pederson. So here's just a map. You can see the red arrows going to the left. That is the British Army chasing Rommel after the Battle of El Alamein. And then you can see the blue arrows. That is Gus and the American Army going east as part of Operation Torch, trapping Rommel between them. So Gus Pederson, in his interview, he said, "We chased Rommel all over creation, but he finally escaped from there and went to Sicily." So Rommel might have escaped, but he left his guys behind. 200,000 German and Italian soldiers surrendered at Tunis in northern Africa. They surrendered, and they surrendered their tanks, their stuff, their bullets, their gasoline, airplanes. So this was a huge haul of German POWs, of enemy POWs. This is twice as many Germans, enemy soldiers that surrendered here than at the famous Battle of Stalingrad. The surrender at Tunis. Gus was there. Well, Gus said we chased Rommel to Sicily, so we better go get him. So that Gus then becomes part of Operation Husky in July of 1943. Operation Husky is the British and American invasion of Sicily, the island of Sicily. That's for those of you not that great with geography, that's the soccer ball that the boot of Italy's kicking. So Gus said about a month after the Africa campaign was over, we got loaded up and we headed for Sicily. We basically had everything going our way there, according to my thinking, because the Germans were backing up and backing up. Here's a photograph of a M7 priest going through the town of, how do you pronounce that? Sciacca, Sicily. I'm sorry to all the Sicilians in the audience. In 1943, and so anybody on that M7 looked like Gus, that might be him. I think he would have been driving through this town. So I mentioned that the Americans were really good at artillery. Well, you know who else is pretty good at artillery? Unfortunately, the Germans. And what they really want to shoot with their artillery guns is they want to take out the American artillery because the American artillery is really good at killing Nazis, and they're the Nazis. They want to silence our guns, and we're trying to silence their guns. So unless you have an actual target you're trying to knock out so your guys can walk through that enemy fortification, you might as well shoot at the opposite team's artillery. And so Gus and the fellas, when they stopped their M7, they would dig a trench for them to hide in because the enemy is soon going to be lobbing artillery shells at them and bombarding them. And so Gus said of Sicily, "That was the ungodliest ground I ever tried to dig a slit trench in. Rocky. I know there was one time that I decided I couldn't go any further, hit solid rock. Then when the barrage came in, started hitting all around, I found out that big rock could be taken out of there too. Darn near as big as I was, but I got down deeper." All right, so I mentioned one famous World War II movie, Casablanca. There's another. Anybody seen that movie, Patton? If you've seen that movie, Patton, um, you may have noticed that one of the subplots is when they're going to Sicily, it's the race to Messina. Patton and the American army is trying his darndest to beat his rival General Montgomery and the British army to the end of the end point of Sicily, Messina. That's right. They're right by the boot of Italy. That's the last town. And both Patton and Montgomery were very vain men, and both of them wanted the glory for themselves and for their country and for their armies. They want to be the one that gets to Messina first. And somebody should tell them that the real enemy is the Nazis, not your friends. Let's try to maybe not. Let's try to win this war without killing as many people as possible. And unfortunately, Gus gets wrapped up in this. Oh. Gus said, "We had orders to make a small amphibious landing behind German lines. And we did that once, and we surprised them and held them until the main force came up from behind." So what happened was Patton is on the northern coast of Sicily, and he's trying to make it to Messina, but he encounters stiff German and Italian resistance, and they're really dug into a position, and it's going to be costly to go through them. So Patton gets this idea. He's going to load Gus and the fellas, a whole bunch of guys, up in landing craft and bring them out to sea and drop them behind the German and Italian lines. So now the German and the Italians, they got to fight from both directions. They got the enemy behind them. Well, they're just going to have to leave that strongly fortified position. And it worked really great. And it's really cool that it's really fun to hear Gus Pederson in his Minnesota Norwegian farmer accent just nonchalantly, just in 2 sentences, describe his part in the Santa Gata landing, in August 8th, 1943. And this was, he's just, those 2 sentences, or people write books about it. So yeah, Gus and his M7 and all the other guys, they surprised the German and Italian forces, knocked out a lot of German tanks, captured 350 Germans, and even a whole lot more Italians captured the next day. And so he said that the soldiers that came up and met him to relieve them from the main force. Speaking of famous World War II movies, if you've seen To Hell and Back, Audie Murphy was in that main force. This was his first taste of combat. So Audie Murphy, he is the most decorated soldier in American history. He won the Medal of Honor, all the other honors, a whole bunch of honors, a whole bunch of medals from a whole bunch of other countries. Most decorated soldier in American history. And he comes home and he writes his story, and he calls it To Hell and Back. And then later on, he stars as himself in the movie To Hell and Back. And Gus was there. And this battle that Gus just described in 2 sentences, this was Audie Murphy's first taste of combat. He said, "I acquired a healthy respect for the Germans as fighters, an insight into the fury of mass combat, and a case of diarrhea. I had eaten too many grapes." Well, that worked so well for Patton that he decides to do it like 2 days later. So Gus he said, "And then that evening we went back a few miles or so and rested all the next day. But then they loaded us up again to do the same trick, and they had aerial observation on us, and they were waiting for us. We did get off the boat with our equipment and stuff. Well, they brought back some heavy artillery. We had a huge mountain on one side, the ocean on the other, and the Germans on both sides. So in other words, they just plain ran over us." This is where he was taken captive here. The mountains on both sides and the ocean and the Germans. An aerial view of that place. That's called the Brolo landing near Brolo, Sicily. General Patton, his two generals and the commander of the raid below him, they said that this is a bad idea. We do not have enough of a force to do what you want to achieve the objective. Patton overruled them. And then on top of that, everything went wrong. The Germans were retreating anyway, so we didn't have to do it. There's no reason to do it. Patton sent 650 Americans to the Battle of Brolo. A quarter of them, 177 of them, were either killed or wounded or missing. Gus was one of those 177. 7 of the 8 M7 priests that landed were knocked out. Gus Pederson was taken prisoner. Gus and about 15 to 20 guys around them were surrendered by their captain. They stood up with their hands above their heads. They were searched. They were loaded on trucks, and they were sent to the rear, going through the Strait of Messina up through Italy. And so, anybody in the audience, do you wear glasses or contacts? You know how annoying it is to be without them. Gus wore glasses, but if you've worn glasses, you know that if you're working outside and it's a hot day and you're working up a sweat, the sweat gets on your glasses, you can't really see, maybe your glasses even fog up, the sweat keeps dripping on them, and so Italy's hot and Gus is working hard. So Gus takes off his glasses and he puts them in his pack, and he stores them in his pack. And when he was taken prisoner by the Germans didn't let him keep his pack. Gus lost his glasses. So there's a lot of bad things about being a POW, but if you wear glasses, one of the kind of the cherry on top of the inconvenience of being a POW is Gus spent 2 years without his glasses. They didn't give him new ones, and it would give him headaches, and he couldn't see right. So what's Jean doing back in Minnesota? Well, she's living with her in-laws without her husband. Living with Emil and Alma Pederson on the farm near Barnesville. And she's pregnant, and then she has a little baby infant girl, and her husband's not there to help, and she's not getting along with her mother-in-law. Joe Pederson wrote about his grandma, so Jean's mother-in-law. "My grandma Pederson loved us, but she was not warm and fuzzy. My grandmother Alma really didn't want my mother taking over her kitchen. Mom would at times be next to tears. Grandpa Emil would put his arm around my mother and say, 'Don't cry, I'll talk to her again.'" Emil was Jean's ally, and they formed a bond that lasted the rest of Emil's long life. He really did love her as a daughter. But it was hard times for Jean. Put yourself in her position. And then a month and a day after Gus was captured, finally, this Western Union telegram comes from the War Department. To Gene Pederson, Barnesville, Minnesota, the commanding general, North Africa area, reports that your husband, Private First Class Gustav M. Pederson, was captured by the enemy on 11 August. Mail address cannot be furnished until confirmation of capture is received through the International Red Cross. If additional information is received, you will be promptly notified. So basically, they're saying that the U.S. Army is saying, we don't got them. We think the Germans have them, but they have not confirmed this. We can't confirm it. We can't say that he's dead or alive. We hope the Red Cross will later notify us that he is a prisoner of war. If we find out anything, we'll let you know. How would you feel if you were Gene or Alma or Emil? Gus, they can't confirm if Gus is dead or alive. And no word the next month, no word the next month. And then this telegram comes. According to family tradition, this telegram comes on Christmas Eve, but the family also has kept this telegram for 80 plus years now, and it's dated November 3rd, so maybe it just felt like Christmas Eve. This is Gene Pederson, Barnesville, Minnesota. Report received through the International Red Cross states that your husband, Private First Class Gustav Pederson, is a prisoner of war of the German government. Letter of information follows to Provost Marshal General. So he's alive. They know this, finally. The first person to read this telegram was Paul McGrath. Paul McGrath was the postman in Barnesville. And the only photograph I have of him is his World War I photo. He served in the Navy during World War I. So according to family stories, Paul McGrath had already spent a full day delivering all the mail. He came back to the office having run his route already, and he sees the telegram, and he gets right back in his car and personally drives out to the Pederson place to deliver this telegram. Paul McGrath knew the importance, the difference between missing in action and POW for a family. He knew this as a veteran himself, but he more keenly knew it as a family member. His cousin, John McGrath, went missing in action on July 19, 1918, 25 years before. So 25 years before, his family got that first telegram saying, we don't know if he's alive or dead. And the McGraths never did get that second telegram saying, he's alive, there's hope. John McGrath was never found. If you go to Barnesville, Minnesota, John McGrath Park is named for him, and you should go in the summer while the snow's not on the ground, because there's a great splash pad for the kids to play around in, play in the water. And while they're doing that, you can look on the bricks in the ground, and you'll see the names of all the soldiers all the young men that Barnesville lost in the First World War. So Gus Pederson was a Kriegi. What's a Kriegi? A Kriegi is what the American and British POWs of the Germans called themselves, because the German name for POW is Kriegsgefangenen. Kriegsgefangenen. That is hard to say. I took a couple years of German. I'm having a problem saying it. And so yeah, try to say that yourself, and then think, maybe I'm just going to abbreviate to Kriegi. And so you can see here there's a number of memoirs of POWs where they refer to this word Kriegi. So Gus is a Kriegi. He is sent on through Italy into Germany on a 40-8 boxcar. It's called a 40-8 boxcar because it is designed to carry 40 men or 8 horses. Gus said, I think it was somewhere in between 10 days and 2 weeks that we rambled along through Germany and through Italy and into Germany. They'd open the doors once in a while, and everybody would go out and we went to the bathroom, those who hadn't gone to the bathroom inside. Some of them couldn't help it if they were loose bowels, diarrhea. It's common in armies. Um, why, it was kind of a gory mess. We probably got 2 slices of that German bread each day, and of course there wasn't any water until they stopped at a station, and you had to be kind of like a camel, drink as much as you could. If you want to learn more about what it was like to live in be an American POW living in a German 40 and 8 boxcar, being imprisoned inside one for a long period of time, I'd recommend reading Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. It was written in the 1960s as Vonnegut's way of working through his PTSD of being an American POW of the Germans who was captured about a year after Gus was captured. And he goes more in depth about life in a 40 and 8 boxcar. So the first stop that Gus made was Stalag 7A. 7A they called it. I have no idea where it was, he said. Well, I do. It's in Moosburg, Bavaria. It was the largest POW camp in Germany. And he spent about a week there. It's kind of a clearinghouse where everybody goes there, and then they decide where they're going to put you for the remainder of the war. And so they figured out where he's going to go. He's going to go to Stalag 2D, near the Baltic Sea in modern-day Poland. But back then it wasn't Poland, it was in Germany. It was in Prussia, Eastern Germany. I don't want to ruin the ending for you, but Germany doesn't win this war. They lose the war. And when they lose the war, the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, the dictator of the Soviet Union, he kind of picks Poland up and moves it west. And so a bunch of Poland becomes Russia, and to compensate that, he makes a bunch of Germany Poland. So Prussia, that's actually where my great grandparents were born. Their hometown is now in Poland, even though they were Germans back then. So Stalag 2D was in Germany, now in Poland. He said, I was told we were about 90 miles from Danzig. Well, it's modern-day Gdansk, Poland. Well, we could certainly hear the rumble of the bombs when they were bombing Danzig. That's pretty cool. Here's a photograph of Stalag 2D. What was life like in Stalag 2D? Well, he lived in a 2-story barracks with a couple hundred guys in each. Wooden bunks, mattresses filled with straw. The food was, he said, pretty thin soup and about 3 slices of German bread per day. Now, when people today think about German bread, they think of nice, flavorful, heavy, dark German bread, good stuff. This isn't that kind of German bread. This is World War II POW German bread. It's probably made with sawdust. I know during the Holocaust, that bread was made with sawdust, and American POWs weren't getting probably much better. Gus said, I never did get lousy. That means he's infested with lice. But boy, them fleas. One thing they had a gracious plenty of is fleas. And those flea bites gave him an infection on his legs, and they don't really have good medical conditions in German POW camps. So his bandage was, he said, mighty poor paper to put on his wounds. So, he would not give Stalag 2D a very high rating. He would not return there to stay again. But as an American, he was fortunate, because were he a Russian or Polish soldier fighting the Nazis who was captured and put in a POW, he would have just been starved to death. About 6 million Soviet prisoners of war, these are Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Kazakhstan, people from Kazakhstan, Siberia, 6 million of them were captured by Germans. 3 million of them died. They died of starvation or neglect or just straight up murder. Because at the core of the Nazi ideology, the reason that World War II started is because of a terrible idea that at the core of it was demented ideas about race. And the Nazis believed that Americans and British people were of the same race as the Germans were, and so when they were captured, they were allowed to live. They believed that the Russians and the Poles were of a different race than they were, so they thought they should just die. And of course, the Jews were considered of a different race as well. This is the time of the Holocaust, and the Holocaust was happening right around Gus in Stolp, Germany, which was where Gus was spending most of his time in World War II in the concentration in the POW camp. Stolp had one of 100 subcamps of the Stutthof concentration camp. I admit I had never heard of the Stutthof concentration camp before, but reading up on it, it is as bad as any of the concentration camps as you hear. 120,000 people were incarcerated there. 65,000 of them were murdered during the war in just 2 years, maybe. Murdered for being Jewish, being born gay, being of some kind of supposed different race than a German. Murdered for having political ideas that Nazis don't like. 65,000. That's about the population of Clay County today. Gus didn't spend a whole lot of time at Stalag 2D because not long after he got there, he was farmed out to a farm, or more specifically, a Arbeitskommando. An Arbeitskommando means a work camp. 6 miles outside of the town of Stolp, Germany, which is of course now in Poland, and I just went online and one of those navigating programs and took a screenshot of what 6 miles outside of that town looks like. So I don't know if he worked on this farm, but this photo comes from it's the kind of place he would have worked. So he spent 17 months working on this farm, and for a farm kid from Minnesota, he said that farm wasn't too bad a place. I could think of a lot worse places to spend 1944 than a farm outside of Stolp, Germany. So how come he's working on a farm? Well, because Germany started World War II, so all of their young men and middle-aged men are off in fighting Russians or fighting Englishmen and fighting Americans and manning stations in France or Norway. And so this is when the farming took a lot more manual labor than it does today. So they got to have somebody to bring in the food. And so where are they going to get it? Well, they're going to kidnap people. So along this, Gus stayed on this farm with 13 kidnapped Ukrainian civilians, 5 kidnapped French civilians, 29 American POWs, a German family, and the farm foreman lived there. And usually there was about one, according to what Gus said, maybe about one German guard. There weren't many guards, and everybody spoke to each other in German, because they're all speaking different languages. So Gus got to learn a third language. Again, his mother tongue's Norwegian. He learned English in school, and now he speaks German. And he said that not all the guards were all that bad. He said there was one guard that when the other guards went away, he would pound on the wall and say "Schnell, schnell," which was their cue to quickly grab extra firewood so they could stay warm at night. So not everybody who was in Germany was a bad person. You don't get to choose what side of the war you're born on. And if it sounds weird that the Germans were uh, using POWs to bring in their harvest, we were doing the same thing in Minnesota. This is a photograph of German prisoners of war in Moorhead, Minnesota, which is in Clay County, Minnesota, the same county as Gus's home farm. So the Clay County was being their farm fields were being worked by 150 German POWs in 1943, and also some in 1944. Difference is that the German POWs in America, they loved it here. Oh, there's a lot of letters that they wrote back to farmers like Hank Peterson about how, oh, this was the best time of their lives. It is no fun living in a totalitarian dictatorship. It is much nicer to live in Minnesota. Um, so, what was Gus's day like? He rose at 6 a.m., ate a Red Cross breakfast of potato soup and bread and parched barley, which is a coffee imitation. See, everybody likes coffee. I like coffee. Germans like coffee. But coffee doesn't grow in Germany. It grows elsewhere. And the Allied navies, British and American navies, are making sure that Germany is not getting anything from anywhere else, including coffee. So if you want something that kind of tastes like coffee, you burn some barley and put it in some boiling water, and it kind of tastes like coffee. Went to work an hour later at 7 a.m., had a half-hour break in the morning, hour break for lunch, half-hour break in the afternoon, came back in at 7 p.m., had Sundays and holidays off. So I mean, yeah, again, I could think of worse places to be to spend your 1944, but he is still working 12-hour days. And Gus was always a religious person, and he said that one of the hardest parts was he being able to hear the church bells ringing on Sundays and knowing he couldn't go to church. He never missed church after that once he came back home to Minnesota. And Gus was able to uh, have some spending money too in the form of cigarettes. See, Gene sent Gus care packages, which included cigarettes. Which is, I mean, again, think of if he would have been Russian or Polish or Jewish, he would have been starved to death. But if you're an American, the Nazis let you get care packages from your family. So Gus would smoke a few cigarettes, but most of the cigarettes he saved as currency because people will do you favors in exchange for cigarettes, and that goes for his fellow American inmates and Ukrainian civilians, but also more importantly, the German guards. We got the best cigarettes in America, best cigarettes in the world. We're good at growing tobacco. Germans love American cigarettes, but Germans can't get American cigarettes. We're not selling them any. The only way they can get American cigarettes is by buying them off of POWs who are getting them from their wives back in Minnesota. So so cigarettes were used as a currency among prisoners, and a lot of the other prisoners, Gus's fellow prisoners, were spending them right and left to make a better life for themselves right now. But Gus saved his because he knew that he would probably need them most at the end, whatever this thing is, this war. Is probably going to be hardest at the end, and that is when his stock of cigarettes are going to be highest in value. So Gus saved most of his cigarettes. As a farm kid, he was often Gus was often chosen for special service on the farm, and the Germans didn't have enough guards to guard everybody. So I mean, those 29 those Ukrainians and Frenchmen and American POWs, they didn't all work all at the same time every day. They would be farmed out. So somebody would say, oh, we need 5 guys over here. We need 12 guys over here. And so they'd go different places. Sometimes Gus would find himself alone and unguarded. But he said that he didn't feel it wise to try to escape. One thing he said is it'd be nice to know where you are, and he said another thing is it'd be nice to know where the front line was. Um, and then, of course, there's the Germans. So he's hundreds of miles behind the line, depending what time, when we're talking about. Gus said, I wouldn't be afraid of German civilians at the time, but it would be Hitler Youth that would have gotten you. Even them little tots that were 10, 12 years old were drilling with wooden guns. They were patriotic as the very dickens. They wouldn't have thought much of doing away with a Yankee. You know, same with the German POWs in Minnesota. It's like you escape from your Moorhead barracks. Where are you gonna go? You gonna cross the ocean? This is an amazing photograph because we don't really know what happened. Well, apparently, while Gus was a POW, at some point a photographer came by and took photos, and apparently Gus got those photos. There's about a half dozen photos of these POWs and at this work farm that he was on. And apparently Gus carried these photos all the way to freedom. I assume he probably bought them with cigarettes. And then he wasn't carrying a whole lot of possessions with him on this long walk that I'm about to tell you about, but these photographs would have been some of them. And there's Gus there. And these were American POWs. So let's talk about this long walk. On January 29, 1945, Gus and the POWs and the Ukrainians and the French people, they're told they got to move out because the front is getting too close. The Russians are getting too close. Gus took part in what I've read in a couple places is probably the largest mass migration of human beings in the history of the world. In the spring of 1945, millions of people across Central Europe are moving west away from the Soviet Red Army. Why are they moving west? Well, because when the Germans were moving east, wherever they went, they brought massacre and death and rape and atrocities. They brought the Holocaust. They brought mass slaughter. They burned everything around them. And now it's from 1945, and Germany is losing the war, and Russia is about to enter Germany, and the Germans are being repaid in full. So if you are a German soldier, you know that you better not be taken prisoner by a Russian soldier, because you know what you did and what your comrades did, what the SS did, what the Einsatzgruppen did, and you have very little hope of survival if you surrender to a Russian. Your only hope to survive, your best hope to survive World War II is go a few hundred miles west and surrender to the first American or British soldier that you can find. So the German military are moving west, away from the Russians. They don't want to be captured by Russians, and they're taking their prisoners with them, the American POWs. If you're in the Holocaust, the death camps, and you've survived this long, if you read the Holocaust literature, this is when the camps are being liquidated, and you got to go on the death marches. And it's not just the prisoners. It's if you're a German or if you're a European civilian, you do not want to be in town when the Russians arrive. You are not safe when the Russians arrive. So Gus is moving along with his POWs under German guard, but also these roads are clogged with European civilians too. The roads are clogged. Everybody's going west. And he is going west with these three guys in this photograph. Gus is on the far right. He's about 23. And he makes a unit walking buddies with these three guys. Pop is an elderly gentleman in his early 30s and an American soldier. And then Junior, he's a 18-year-old kid. And they walk and they walk. And at night, they take two of their jackets and they button them together to make a tent. And the third jacket becomes the blanket that the three sleep under. They stick together. They walk in zigzags for 43 days. They walk maybe 15 miles a day, 14, 15 miles a day. And zigzagging because the guards are trying to give them shelter every night in barns along the way. They're going vaguely west, and there's no way to tell how long they walked for those 43 days, but it was about 600 miles, perhaps. As April dawns, the days are getting warmer, and Junior gets hot. And so he takes off his jacket and he throws it away. And Pop and Gus, they say, "Don't do that." And Junior says, "Too bad I'm doing it." He throws his jacket away. Well, April nights still get cold, and Junior catches cold, and he gets sick, and he's unable to walk on his own. And Gus and Pop are carrying him along. But they're weak too. When Gus was captured, he was 185 pounds. When he was liberated, he was 128 pounds. They're on the long march. They're POWs themselves. So they carry him as long as they can, but then they see a German truck full of German soldiers driving by, and they flag it down, and Gus bribes them with cigarettes to put Junior on their truck and let him have a ride to wherever they're going. And they agree to it. And they wish Junior luck, and they keep walking. And they keep walking until April 12. On April 12, Gus's guards see two American soldiers, and they immediately throw down their arms and surrender. And they surrender their POWs, the prisoners they're guarding. And Gus said that he was surprised that it was that easy. He was surprised there was no exchange of fire. The first Americans they saw, they just surrendered. And to be honest, I'm kind of surprised that he didn't understand the situation. The goal in his guards' life, these guys that are probably World War I veterans in their 40s, their goal is to surrender to an American. That's the best hope for a German soldier to survive World War II in 1945, is to surrender to an American. This is the end of the war. Hitler has got 2 weeks to live. The war would end in less than a month. The Germans are just trying to surrender to American and British soldiers, not the Russians. So his guards are the happiest guys in Germany that day. And then later on that day, they heard, while back in American hands as a free man, he gets the sad news that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our president, died. So Gus was sent to Camp Lucky Strike for about 3 weeks to recuperate. Camp Lucky Strike was one of the debarkation camps for American soldiers that we had on the western coast of France. So basically, before we send you back home to the USA, we send you to one of these camps to fatten you up. Gus said he ate a lot of donuts, so to organize you and to get you ready for going overseas. And we named these camps after cigarettes, brands of cigarettes. Gus was at Camp Lucky Strike, but we could have went to Pall Mall or Camp Philip Morris or Camp Old Gold. He came back home. He got on a big cargo airplane and flew across the Atlantic Ocean, landed in Virginia, got on a train, made it to Minnesota, made it to the Twin Cities, St. Paul, Minneapolis, but had to wait some hours to get a train ride back to Barnesville. And while he was waiting, he looked up Gene's sister. His wife's sister lived in the Twin Cities, and so he spent some time with her, and he made her promise not to let Gene know that he was coming. He wanted to be a surprise. Well, Gene's sister couldn't help herself. She sent a telegram and let Gene know that he was coming. And Gus and Gene were reunited, and they had 4 more kids. Gus was able to meet his first child, Faith, when she was 2 years old. Gus, Gus, as an older man, Gus got kind of fat because he promised he was never going to be hungry again. And they were never wealthy. Joe Pederson, his son, said his dad was never really a great farmer, but he was a great dad. Always made sure the family went to church every Sunday. But the war did leave scars, psychological scars on him. How's it not gonna? He didn't really talk about it for years, but they didn't know anything about it. His kids didn't know anything about his service. They didn't know he was a POW when they were growing up. He would medicate with alcohol, and he was also a community leader. He was very active in his church, wrote columns for the church newspaper, active at the VFW, and visited the VFW club, and just a member of the community, just a Minnesota farmer guy. About 40 years after the war, it was the 1980s, his kids were grown, they had kids. Joe Pederson was at his dad's house and heard the phone ring, and somebody was asking, I think it was asking for Pete. And apparently Gus went by the name Pete back in the war. Pete Pederson, apparently. But Joe was kind of confused and said, "Dad, I think it's for you." So he handed the phone to his dad, and his dad was hard of hearing, so he said, "What? What?" Finally, he was able to hear, and he burst into tears on the phone. And on the other end of the phone was Junior. James Mariano was his name, and he survived the war, and he wanted to thank Gus. This is the first that he knew that Junior was still alive. They didn't know, him and Pop didn't know what happened to Junior, but he survived the war, and he wanted to thank Gus for saving his life by bribing those Germans with cigarettes to give him a ride. And Junior asked Gus if he was going to be at the ex-POW convention in Las Vegas that was coming up. And Gus was very active in 2 POW groups. One of the ex-POWs of North Dakota, even though he's a Minnesotan, but he's lived not far from the North Dakota border, and ex-POWs of the Red River Valley. But he said that he was sorry, but he didn't think that he'd be able to afford to go to Las Vegas. Well, the people of Barnesville heard that, and some guys at the VFW got the money together to make sure that Gus Pederson made it to Las Vegas to that convention where he and Junior were reunited. Gus and Gene lived a good, long life together. This is the bulletin for their 50th anniversary on November 27, 1991. And their kids were there, their grandkids were there, great-grandkids were there, nieces, nephews. They got 1,000 relatives around Clay County. And it's a great, considering that they almost didn't even have one anniversary together. Their first anniversary, Gus was in North Africa. Their second and third anniversaries, Gus was a POW in Germany. But he made it home, and he got to have a life when so many people around him didn't get to survive the war. Gus was able to survive the war, come home to his family, to his farm, and live a decent Minnesotan life. I'm going to let Joe Pederson, their son, have the last words. He said, "It's still hard to fathom what my dad went through. It must have been hell. He lived a simple life after he returned home, but he will always be my hero."